Hi, and welcome to this tutorial session. In this series of videos, we'll have some in-depth understanding of Kubernetes architecture. I have tried to explain things in its simplest form so that anyone having fundamental understanding of containers and Kubernetes can extend their knowledge about what happens behind the scene. What we want to do is we want to create a deployment named nginx with nginx image. Then we want to scale that deployment and finally expose port 80 using the services, and then we want to reach out to these services using the curl command. So this is what we want to do. But in this tutorial, actually we want to know what happens behind the scene. This is what happens behind the scene. When a user writes a kubectl command, the command is given to the API server. API server adds that command in a etcd database. Like if you want to create a deployment, it adds the deployment in the etcd database. If we want to create a pod, it adds the pods in the database. After that, kube manager wakes up and it has lots of controller loops like deployment and replica set, and they start working. And if they say a deployment is there, then they create talk to API server to create a replica set, and then again a replica control loop starts and it communicate with API server to create pods, means number of pods that it wants. And then after the pods are created, the job of scheduler starts. Scheduler see if how many nodes are registered with the API server, and based on that, it used to assign that nodes to the pods. And then the kubelet see, oh, there is some node and I got my word. So kubelet start making containers and start running the pods on the nodes. So this is what happens behind the scene, and this is what we are going to understand throughout this video series. This course has been adapted from the original source Kubernetes, the hardware guide created by Google Kelsey Hightower, and you can find the original Kubernetes, the hardware guide on this particular link. Kubernetes, the hardware, guides you through the process of setting up a Kubernetes cluster manually without automated scripts or installers. So this is just to understand the infrastructure of how Kubernetes work. We are not going to use this in production, but it really helps us in case we want to scale up the things, and in case we are limited to the service provider. Like if we are using Amazon EKS and some services, we sometimes we feel that okay, we are limited to this only, but if we know the architecture, we can extend that to whatever we need. The contents that we are going to cover is secure communication. Here we need to understand how different components of Kubernetes communicate with each other. If you have seen the tutorial about Kubernetes the hard way by Kelsey Hightower, there he generated lots of certificates and kube configuration files. So we need to understand why we need all that certificates. We'll see how server and client communicate with each other. We'll also talk about TLS handshaking, dig a little bit on RSA, and show you a demo. I'll show you a demo about how RSA works. Finally, we'll get some overview of PKI and generate certificates using CFSSL and CFSSL JSON. Next, we'll see Kubernetes architecture. In this, we are going to see how Kubernetes components communicate with each other, what is the role of each component of Kubernetes, and then we'll have a lab in which we are going to build one node cluster from scratch. And that's really going to be an interesting one. Finally, we'll move to see the Kubernetes the hard way. And in this section, we'll dig into Kubernetes the hard way by Kelsey Hightower and build our own multi-control plane multi-node cluster. Thank you, and see you in the next video.